Well, folks, Sherrod Brown, who is Ohio's former Democrat senator, is officially launching his comeback bid for the 2026 Senate election, where he plans to challenge incumbent Republican Senator Jon Husted. Now, the Ohio Senate election is shaping up to be a critical battleground state, just as it was in 24 and in 2022, with Sherrod Brown aiming to reclaim a seat that he lost back in 2024. Now, this move signals Democrats' aggressive move to flip the Senate. But Sherrod Brown, can he overcome Ohio's rightward shift in this high-stakes Senate race? But let's dive into it. Now, we know Sherrod Brown, who served as Ohio's U.S. Senator from 2006 to 2025, was a three-term Democrat who is very much known for his populist appeal and working class American rhetoric. He lost his 2024 re-election bid by really a close margin to now Senator Bernie Moreno. He lost by roughly 3.5 percentage points, despite outrunning Kamala Harris by nearly 8 points from the top of the ticket. Look at this. Trump wins by 11 points. Sherrod Brown only loses by 3 points. 3 points. He outran the top of the ticket by big numbers there. Brown's 2024 campaign was one of the most expensive Senate races in U.S. history that was backed heavily by Chuck Schumer's Senate Majority PAC. And his defeat reflects Ohio's growing Republican lean, as Trump carried this state by 11 points in 2024. Now, Sherrod Brown is banking on his name recognition and working class appeal to challenge Jon Husted in the 2026 Senate elections in Ohio. We know Democrats, where have they lost the most support? There are two main groups they've lost support with. That is Hispanics and working class Americans. That's who they've lost with. If Democrats ever want to be a mainstream party again, they need to win back working class voters. But I think with the rhetoric, with the policies that they propose, they have no chance of appealing to working class voters. But maybe, just maybe, Sherrod Brown can do that. Now, the Ohio Senate race is a special election to fill the remainder of current Vice President J.D. Vance's term, which ends in 2028 after he was elected Vice President in 2024. Now, Jon Husted, who was appointed by Governor Mike DeWine in January, is the Republican incumbent with over 20 years of statewide appeal in the state. Now, we know an interesting about Mike DeWine. Go back to 2006 when Sherrod Brown won this election. Who did he beat? No other than current governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, who was at that time running for a third election. He was running for re-election. He was initially elected back in 1994. Mike DeWine won in 2000. And then, fast forward to 2006, he loses by a pretty big margin too. Pretty big margin. In the state, he lost by 12 percentage points. But now, Mike DeWine, he sent his lieutenant governor, Jon Husted, to the Senate. And now, Husted's campaign emphasizes his alignment with President Donald Trump's agenda, a proven winning formula in Ohio. We know that Ohio, for a long time, was a bellwether state. They voted for the winner of every presidential election since 1964. Every single year. The last time was 1960 when it voted for Richard Nixon, when JFK won the presidential election in 1960. The next time that would happen, the year 2020, when Donald Trump broke the state of Ohio, when Ohio voted for President Donald Trump by roughly 8 percentage points in 2020, while Joe Biden was elected president in that same year. It was the first time in nearly 60 years that this had happened. 60 years was the last time that Ohio voted for the losing candidate in the presidential election. Now, Brown's entry to the Ohio Senate race does make it more competitive than it was. Right now, I have this as a likely Republican seat, and I have not made, this all just happened yesterday. I have not made any changes yet. We are going to be considering some changes, potentially moving this to a lean Republican seat from likely, but as of now, it is still a likely seat because I do think that Brown will make this more competitive. But at the end of the day, Ohio's red tilt and President Donald Trump's influence in the state poses steep challenges to Brown's campaign. Now, one weakness that the Republicans may have in the state of Ohio is simply name recognition. We know Jon Husted has much lower name recognition than Sherrod Brown, but we know it could be a weakness, but Brown also faces a GOP-leaning electorate at the end of the day. Ohio is not this swing state anymore. It is not a bellwether state. This is a Republican, this is a likely Republican seat in presidential elections. Likely. There are basically two Democrats that can even compete statewide here. And that'd be Sherrod Brown, Tim Ryan. Maybe you could say Amy Acton, but I really have a hard time even saying that simply because, yes, is she polling all right now in the gubernatorial election? For those who do not know, Amy Acton appears to be the Democrat frontrunner as of right now in the gubernatorial election for the Democrat primary. Now, right now, you can see right here, Vivek Ramaswamy leading Amy Acton by roughly a point in the most recent impact research. And from Bowling Green State University with YouGov, we can see Ramaswamy up roughly 5 percentage points on Amy Acton. Now, obviously, I don't think she has as good of statewide appeal, but Tim Ryan and Sherrod Brown, they are the two Democrats that are left in a state that is made up of working class voters, working class Americans who have moved very much to the right. Remember, this was a state that not that long ago, not that distant in the distant future, voted for Barack Obama by 4 points. After the year before voting for Bush by 2 points. Voted for Bush the year before by 3, or the presidential election before that by 3.5 points. It voted for Clinton by 6 points. It's like, look, this is a state that was very much in the middle until 2016. 2016, 2020, 2024. 2024 really solidified Ohio as a Republican state going forward. This is no longer a swing state. But now the big question, or what's on a lot of people's minds is why? Why does this bid matter? It really matters at the end of the day for Sherrod Brown and Democrats nationally, because Democrats need to flip roughly 4 seats to take control of the Senate in the 2026 elections. Right now, this is what the makeup of the Senate looks like. You have Republicans that hold North Carolina and Maine. Democrats hold Michigan, Georgia, New Hampshire, Minnesota. Democrats need to flip 4. They need to flip 4. So where you go? Okay. Where else can you go? Okay, you need to flip Maine, need to flip North Carolina, and we know Roy Cooper just entered the North Carolina Senate race. We know obviously he's only won statewide elections before. He's never ran at the federal level before. I think there will be challenges, and no matter who wins this, I think they're going to win by less than 2 percentage points at the end of the day. But still, where else can Democrats go? They're at 49, okay? You need to go to Ohio. Barely squeak by in Ohio. And still, you're only at a 50-50 Senate with J.D. Vance as the tie-breaking vote. Republicans will have the upper hand. They have to flip somewhere else. They need to flip in Iowa. They need to flip in Alaska. I really have a hard time ever seeing them flip Texas. I really, really have a hard time seeing that happen. But where else can they go? They really can't go anywhere else. Like if Democrats want to have a majority, they need to win in Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Maine, and hold on in Michigan and Georgia, which I think at the end of the day is extremely unlikely that they flip all of them. I really do. I think it's very unlikely that they flip all of these. And Brown is seen, and I think, at the end of the day, I don't think this becomes a toss-up race. This does not become a toss-up race. Republicans still have a clear advantage in this race. Remember, in the Cook Partisan Voting Index, you can see right here that Ohio, it's a R+4 environment. An R+4 environment. This is nothing like North Carolina where it's an R+1. Nothing like that anymore. Or even Michigan where it's even. It's like, this is 5 points to the right of Michigan. And most likely is going to continue shifting further and further to the right as long as Democrats continue to push their voodoo policies, these policies that at the end of the day do not resonate with working class Americans. They don't. Maybe they don't, they don't all approve of President Trump and the Republican Party, but they approve much more of the Republican Party than they do of the Democrat Party, in the National Democrat Party as of right now. But look, I think it's still going to be really tough. Look, Husted has Trump's endorsement, will have cash from the Trump campaign to throw behind him. And Donald Trump has high approval ratings in Ohio, which could boost Husted even further as GOP voters rally behind this America First, pro-America First policy candidate. And Brown's reliance on more coastal elite funding and Schumer's influence may alienate some Ohioans that are tired of out-of-state agendas and really influence from out-of-state parties. Sherrod Brown maybe back in the Obama days could appeal to these working class voters. Maybe even during Donald Trump's first term, he could appeal to those people. But simply, the Democrat Party has left working class Americans, and that is what happened to Sherrod Brown. He got left in the dust. We know that there will be many big issues that will be talked about in this election, the economy and tariffs. Now, Brown will most likely hammer on economic issues, but at the end of the day, look, Jon Husted supported. He supports Trump's economic policies, deregulation, lower taxes, and the one that could be a prickly bitch is the tariffs. Look, I 100% support using tariffs as a negotiating tactic. 100%. 100%. I do not support using tariffs as a way to generate revenue or as a way to protect domestic industries. Simply, it is bad economic policy. It is bad economic policy. It's a good negotiating tactic, no doubt. But at the end of the day, the goals should be focusing on no tariffs, on free trade at the end of the day. And yes, could tariffs help the manufacturing base? Sure. I think maybe it could. But at the end of the day, the overall economy would be better with no tariffs. Simply, you need to use the threat of tariffs to negotiate better trade deals with countries. So countries start buying more products from the U.S. They start using services from the U.S. Now, a big piece of this election that I'm really interested to see how it turns out is the national versus local issues. The 2026 Senate election could hinge on a lot of national issues. There's a lot of national sentiment towards President Trump, the Trump administration, what's going on in America right now versus local issues. Which one is going to dominate? I think at the end of the day, in Ohio, I think Sherrod Brown needs to focus on both. I think he needs to focus on some of the bad things that he believes that Donald Trump is doing while tying that in with local issues. But at the end of the day, I think the national issues are going to dominate. They're going to dominate. And Brown's, previous pro-labor stances resonates with some. But at the end of the day, when you are pro-labor, but you support these left-leaning policies, allowing transgenders to go into, women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms, allowing, Sherrod Brown, you were in the Senate the whole time when President Biden allowed 20 million illegal, undocumented immigrants to flow across our southern border. That's what you allowed to happen. You let this happen on your watch. How is that pro-labor? It's simply a supply and demand question. There's a higher supply of labor that's willing to do it for a lower price. The prices will go down. Prices of labor will go down. Simply, that is simply how it works. But you supported a lot of far-left radical policies promoted by the Biden administration that are not pro-labor. They are not pro-labor. And the only edge that Brown is going to have here, I think, is his visibility. Look, Husted has a long record as a lieutenant governor and a secretary of state, which, it kind of levels the field. But Sherrod Brown was on the federal level. He was on a national stage, and I think he is, as far as a Democrat, he has probably the best name recognition out of any Democrat in the state. And you mix in the fact that, Trump's very popular in the state of Ohio, which could overshadow Brown's campaign and really, really elevate Jon Husted in 2026. So we're going to have to see what happens, looking at the structural advantages that I believe the Republican Party has in the state of Ohio. The fact that voters are frustrated with Brown from the 3 terms that he was in office and his ties to the National Democrats, which is seen as out of touch with the values of Ohioans. And to be honest, Brown is a Schumer hand-picked candidate. And he will be beholden to the liberal elites at the end of the day. But the midterm dynamics may favor the Democrat Party. Structurally, it's going to favor the Republican Party. But I think there are certain states where you could see that it doesn't. So we'll see what happens. Well, folks, to wrap things up, Sherrod Brown's launch into the 2026 Senate election set up a blockbuster election in the state of Ohio against Jon Husted. Now, while Brown and his experience and name recognition may make him, in theory, a formidable contender, Ohio's Republican lean and a Trump-backed candidate in Jon Husted creates a very tough fight for the Democrats. Now, the 2026 Senate election will test whether Brown can defy the odds or if Ohio's conservative wave will keep the GOP in control. But folks, stay tuned for updates. We'll be here every step of the way to let you know what's going on. As always, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. And folks, we will catch you next time.